If you have a fiddle leaf frig around, if you have a fiddle leaf, friggity frigger, frig. If you have a fiddle leaf fig around the house that you want to propagate, or maybe one that you rescued like I did in this video, then I want to show you how I propagated in both soil and water this beautiful houseplant and get a 100% success rate. Make sure you stay until the end to see the final results. It all began with this 3-gallon fiddle leaf fig. I'm using this one because it was a rescue that I saw had struggled a bit and I wanted to grow it out and get additional props from it. So the first thing I wanted to do was to sanitize the pruners to prevent spreading disease from one plant to another. And I did this by grabbing my spray bottle filled with rubbing alcohol, spraying the pruners on both sides and removing the excess alcohol off the pruners with a cotton ball. Now this might seem like an unnecessary step, but to improve the rate of propagation, it's definitely a step you don't want to skip. Then I took my plant and looked to see what cuttings I could use. I wanted to take cuttings that still allowed my plant to continue to fill in, but I still had cuttings that were large enough to allow me to propagate them. I took each cutting from the plant just under the node, which is where the petiole meets the stem. And when I sized my cuttings from my fiddle leaf fig, or Ficus Lyrata, as it otherwise is called, I made sure that each cutting had at least 2 nodes and in some cases more. Once my cutting was sized, I removed the bottom leaf or leaves from the stem and left a leaf or 2 up top. With this cutting, the nodes were closer together, so it ended up with about 4 nodes. And as you can see, I removed the leaves with my pruners instead of just ripping them off, because doing it that way sometimes can strip the side of the cutting as you pull it away. This is the tip of the cutting, and I did the same to this one and removed a couple leaves. Before moving on to the next large cutting, I started to prepare the cuttings further by cutting in half the leaves that were still on the stems that I prepared. This would prevent the plant from focusing on maintaining the larger leaves and focus more on putting out roots, which is what I was looking for. I often get a lot of questions on how to exactly make the cuts, so I want you to see here step by step. You can see again that I made the cut just under the node, which will increase my success rate. My goal with this propagation was to take and prepare 5 cuttings total, to plant 3 of them in soil together and 2 in water. In preparing it, I can see that this plant at one point was neglected a bit, and ideally I want to propagate with as healthy as a plant as possible, but in this case I had no choice, but I knew I could make it work. Again, when preparing them, I cut all the leaves remaining in half. In preparation of my fiddle leaf fig cutting, I could set the cuttings off to the side for a few hours after making my cuts before placing them in the soil or water to let the cut end dry out or callus over. Doing this can help prevent rot, which can happen if a freshly cut stem is placed immediately into a moist environment. And you might want to try that if at first you don't succeed. With these cuttings, I won't be doing that, as I've found that in my environment I can get a successful propagation without doing it. Now was the fun part, and it was time to make the soil. For this mix, I used a peat and perlite mix, which I had on hand, along with some cocoa coir and perlite. With each component, I used 2 handfuls of each one, so this mix was equal parts of all components. This mix is a great general propagation mix that I use for most of my propagations because it allows the mix to have sufficient water holding capacity, but at the same time provides proper drainage and aeration during the process, and especially after I water so that most of it drains out quickly. And this is what the final soil mix looked like. I then took a 4-inch pot and filled it with soil and compacted the soil. I know I'll get some heat for this, and comments saying to not compact the soil, but I've used this mix, or one that's very similar for my own personal use and professionally. Always compacted it and never had issues and always worked for me. For my cuttings, it prevents them from falling over, And to furthermore keep them from falling over, I hydrate the soil a bit before the cuttings go in. Now, in order to increase the chances of seeing roots even further, I used rooting hormone. There are different ones in the market today, but this one I have found to work well for me. And the way I used it was that I put a small amount on a napkin and dipped the tip of each cutting in the powder, so the tip was completely covered with rooting hormone. If you're wondering why I put it on a napkin, it's so I don't contaminate the hormone that is in the bottle if the cutting is contaminated. I know it's a bit overkill, but I like to cover all my bases and not leave anything to chance. And also, if something did go wrong, I knew I could rule out the contamination. Now with a wooden dowel, I opened a hole for each cutting and placed the cutting in the soil deep enough so that at least the first node is in the soil and firm up the soil around so that the cutting doesn't tip over. During this step, I'm also mindful to spread the cuttings apart in the soil so that as they grow, they can create a full-looking plant. From here, I placed them in bright, indirect light under my grow lights and covered them with an upside-down vase to provide the humidity they need until they grow roots and prevent the cuttings from drying out. Now, I wanted to propagate the remaining 2 cuttings in the water. You can use rainwater, distilled, or purified water if you choose, but I've found that they're not that picky, and I use regular old tap water for my Fiddle Leaf Fig propagations. Then I filled my prop tubes that I had previously sanitized with rubbing alcohol. I then added the cuttings to the water and did not apply the rooting hormone as it didn't need it, and we can see what they look like on day 1. Six weeks later, we can see that they put out a substantial amount of roots. I've made sure during this process that the cuttings always remain submerged in water, and if the water built up algae, I replaced the water and added a little hydrogen peroxide to the water to keep it off longer. Again, this method is 100% successful for me, probably because every step is followed. The cuts were made under the node, tools were sterilized, rooting hormone was used, and every other step mentioned in this video. These cuttings are overdue to be potted up to soil, and I will do so in a week or 2. And when I do, I'll use a similar mix to the one I used in this video, and during the course of about 2 weeks, I'll start by watering them heavily at first, and slowly backing off the water to where I'm watering them when the top layer of soil is dry to the touch. And once it's grown out, there are special steps that we need to take care of them. So watch this video next so you can grow a healthy fiddle leaf fig.